Welcome to the Block and Tackle Show, hosted by Carl Block. Carl is a partner in the law firm of Loeb & Loeb here in Los Angeles, California. He will be tackling some of the biggest issues in business today. Listen, learn, and enjoy as he leaves no stone unturned during deep conversations with some of today's most amazing business leaders. Welcome to the show.
So I think you're of the view that as this technology gets more and more advanced, and let's say, for example, people may forego car ownership, they could literally use these rideshare services linked up to their calendar or smartphone and be in a position where all of this becomes very automated. You wouldn't even have to call and request one of these things. They could link with your calendar, for example, and then they'd show up and be there and they'd know where you wanted to go. You see that as part of the future, don't you?
I do. In fact, in this new book, the Flagship Experience, I talk about this mobility-related customer experience that spans both your privately owned vehicle, but also how you move outside your vehicle. And in fact, movement outside your vehicle also has you need to decide, do I move or does the item come to me, right? So there's an interesting decision that you could be making. But I think the particularly urban dwellers are becoming increasingly comfortable, first of all, with a multimodal future, right, where you use multiple modalities as opposed to move, as opposed to just relying on your personally owned vehicle, no matter how sophisticated it is. And in doing that, and as you're thinking about that overall customer experience, you're starting to have certain expectations, not unlike the expectations that we've learned to have in our online digital life. It will not. I'm not advocating that everybody will give access to our mobility providers with all the data, all our personal data. But if you think about it, companies like Google, companies like Uber, Lyft, a number of companies that are involved, or Instacart, they understand our mobility, right? And they understand our mobility by whether it is by the destinations that we choose and how we, in the case of Google Maps, for example, how we get from point A to point B. In the routes that we travel, again, think of Google's Waze. In the rides that we take, in the case of Uber, and in the rides that we don't take and instead ask for things to come to us. So there are already companies that are understanding how we move and why. Now, I'll give you an example. I was traveling last week, and I didn't rent a car. And what was to my surprise when I came home Sunday is that the overall cost. Now, I stayed within cities, right? So I didn't have to travel distances outside cities. But what was interesting also to me was the overall cost of my transportation ended up being much lower than if I had rented a car for 2 or 3 days in each one of the cities that I was traveling. Now, I used primarily ride-hailing, but also some light rail and subways, and I did some walking. Right, the weather permitted that in a couple of the cities that I was. And I think people are starting to play out this calculus in their mind, and they're as part of that analysis that they do, they're saying, well, okay, if I get value, then I'm willing to offer some of my data, some of my goals to the company providing the service, right? So before actually the Tesla electric vehicles came to market, we were not thinking of charging or refueling in the case of internal combustion engine vehicles as part of the customer experience. When Tesla started creating the supercharging their charging stations with the superchargers, all of a sudden vehicle charging became part of the mobility customer experience. And today there's a big difference when I go to a Tesla charging station, because with my card, Tesla has all the data in terms of the vehicle that I drive, where I am, how much I'm charging. They can price their charging based on the time of day and the demand that exists. So all of that, by the way, is driven by AI. Whereas if I go to a third party, let's call it charging network, I don't get these conveniences. So all of a sudden, if I am a Tesla owner, I'm starting to see an advantage over not having, a customer experience advantage. And once I see that advantage, that value, as I keep calling that value exchange between, in this case, automaker and consumer, I would be willing to give more access to my data in order to get equivalent value or equivalent conveniences. It would be interesting to me to see what is going to happen as other automakers are moving to the Tesla charging network that they have. I'm sure you've seen the announcements over the past year. How that data will be used, right? Because Tesla will be getting that data. But again, as I said, it's now charging has become part of the customer experience. Parking has become part of the customer experience. So now all of a sudden, if I may be willing to say to my automaker that I have a meeting at this time in this location, can you check to see whether the vehicle, my vehicle has enough charge to make it to that location and back, or do I need to charge somewhere in the before or after? And if so, where will this charging take place? So now all of a sudden you're starting to involve into a constant conversation relating to mobility between user of the vehicle and an automaker or provider of the service. And that's what's going to bring up the scenarios that I described in the new book and you mentioned.
So this is really fascinating. And I want to move on in a second to a more general discussion of generative AI. But I just want to say quickly, obviously, as this technology becomes more and more disruptive, and if we get to a point where consumers do not want their own vehicles anymore, there's already 280 million private vehicles, that will have a corresponding effect on dealerships, what is manufactured, how it's manufactured, how it's sold, which will be very interesting. And of course, very briefly, what we've talked about, the more technology that is embedded in the UX or the customer experience, and the more data that is collected, it does give rise to security issues, which I am sure that you and anybody else who's involved in planning for risk management for these technological advances, you're all thinking about that.
Yeah, both cybersecurity and privacy will be impacted by the incorporation of these technologies into our mobility future. In the same way, by the way, that have been incorporated in our online digital lives, right? I will say one more comment if I could. This morning I was giving a presentation to a group of employees from a European group executives from a European automaker, And I said to them that on the one hand, you cannot be, you need to be thinking in terms of longer timelines. I mean, this is not a 1 year transition. But I said, you're really at a crossroads and you really need to decide whether you're going to remain vehicle centric and rely on your existing network of partners, including your dealers and your existing business models, or whether you're going to become customer centric and start establishing direct relationships with not only the customer but also the user of the vehicle. And I wanted to distinguish between those two because, a vehicle that's bought by person X may be used by 10 other individuals, whether they are in person X's household or through car sharing, which is becoming increasingly popular, particularly outside the US. Other individuals use privately owned vehicles for a short term, right? For a short term transaction. So this type of changes will cause the automaker to rethink those relationships and those business models that they have, and establishing a direct relationship with the user of the vehicle and becoming customer centric means that not only you'll have the ability to directly observe the mobility behavior of that user, but you have to provide something in return for the right to do that observation. I mean, on the internet, we've seen companies like Google, again, not to harp on Google, but you get free email, but in exchange you have to give some of your data up, and you have to be exposed to advertising, right? The reason that people continue to do it is because they see that value. They need that. They place a value on the free email service. I think the same kind of mindset will need to start permeating within automakers.
That makes a lot of sense. So thank you for that discussion. I think we covered a lot of ground, and I think it's going to be very interesting to people. So now I want to talk a little bit about generative AI generally. So you are a frequent visitor to CES. You write blogs. You see what people have to say. You see what the media talks about. And of course, there's plenty of sensationalism out there about how robots are going to take over the world, and we're going to create this generative AI where humans are going to be irrelevant, and AI will be able to start wars, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, since you're immersed in this, and people who are watching the video are going to see your smile, those who are listening without watching, I'm telling them that you're smiling because there are some fantastic, and I don't mean beneficial, but maybe not so realistic or sensationalist ideas about generative AI, at least within 50, 100 or more years. And the idea that robots are going to take over the world anytime soon doesn't seem to be very realistic, does it?
Well, okay. So this is, so I've been in AI since 1982. Mm-hmm. And I'm saying this because in this intervening 40 years, this is the fourth AI spring, if I can call it, that I have experienced, or I'm experiencing. In the previous three, we've also had both very exciting and optimistic projections, and we've had a lot of, let's call it Luddite statements about a very bleak future as a result of the innovations we were making at that particular spring. And I would say again, on the optimistic side, every time we on the one hand, we didn't achieve what we were projecting, but every time we made progress. And to me, that's important, right? In the sense that even though we didn't achieve 100% of what we were claiming to that we will be achieving, nonetheless, we made progress, and based on that progress, we're able to find ourselves where we are today. Generative AI has caught, I would say, many of us by surprise at the not only the capabilities that these systems exhibit, but also at how fast now we have seen progress over the past year and a half since it burst into the scene. Based on the work that we do with corporations, in several cases, in several different corporations, in a few use cases, we are seeing very encouraging results, which will impact how the employees are engaged in the work that they're doing. So a recent example is, as you probably know, generative AI is used extensively now for programming, computer programming. And in the last 18 months, we're seeing some tremendously encouraging results, so much so that companies now, for certain types of programming, are starting to require their employees, their software engineers, to use the so-called co-pilot, programmers co-pilots. We're also seeing some encouraging results in tasks that involve creativity. Writing an email, writing a memo, writing, or creating an online advertisement. Now, that's the good news. On the not so good news, we continue to find that these systems make mistakes. So we're not yet at a point where we can do a set it and forget it. I will start with myself. I'm still a doubter on whether these systems can reason, and reasoning is an important part of AI, or whether they're just doing pattern matching and they can do predictions, many of which are extremely accurate and extremely valuable. So we are not, so for people who talk about artificial general intelligence and having these systems completely take over the performance of tasks, I don't believe that we are there yet. How long will it take us to get there? It really depends. I've heard optimistic projections of just a few years, 3, 4, 5 years, and other less optimistic projections that will say we'll still need a few decades. And this, both sides, by the way, coming from people who are a lot more qualified than I am to make such pronouncements. But I think we're seeing some impressive performance, and we cannot ignore that, right? Nor we can sweep it under the rug.
I understand. I would say to you, in many areas where you have qualified experts who have vast differences in their modeling and projections about what's commercially feasible and how it will be used, it usually means that they really don't know. It's hard logically to reconcile them otherwise.
Right. I mean, last week I was at an event where, again, advances in both AI and a couple of other fields were discussed, and I can tell you that people from many different industries, including researchers from those fields, are looking at whether they can use generative AI and what it will mean to use generative AI in their work. Some of them are concerned about whether the data that they have can really be used effectively by such systems to be trained and then be able to make their analysis and predictions. Some of them are concerned by the lack of explainability. So these systems, by and large, again, they're not, but because of the way that they're built, right? These are very large deep neural networks. These architectures and these systems are not built to explain themselves. They can provide you with some. Just because they provide you with text doesn't mean that they really provide you with their train of thought, if you will. So there's still, and that's both in a sense a shortcoming, but also it becomes a springboard for new work that will have to follow. But again, it is this type of conversations, this type of issues that make me think that we still have work to do.
Understood. And I would say to you that when it comes to pattern recognition, comparing data that they have access to, that certainly machine learning and machine analysis is likely to come up with some pretty interesting results. But, it doesn't sound like we're at the point where they can evaluate data and say this was biased or emotionally this skewed what was said, or people had reasons to give false data and we can't necessarily discern motivations. It seems like that's a little bit further off than just pattern recognition and learning how to analyze it.
Actually, I would say, just to build upon your statement, this is an area of active research as it should be, because we are starting to be concerned of infringement. We're concerned about plagiarism, if you will, the use of copyrighted materials without the proper licenses. Overall, the provenance of data that was used to train the so-called large language models is starting to come to the surface as an important issue that needs to be clarified and well understood. Then you have the various actors, malicious actors, that can use the systems for, whether it is for the so-called deep fakes, and create misinformation streams, but also inject in the data and in the models malicious, whether it is malicious code, whether it is other types of viruses and problems that can cause the resulting large language model to make decisions and to create output that is intentionally problematic. And these are some really big issues that you were asking earlier how we can use these systems into our daily work and have them even replace humans. This type, unless we address these issues effectively and to our satisfaction, I think we will not be able to just let these systems go, because the implications can be devastating.
And hence, this could be several decades away as well.
Yes, I mean, I would say we do not know the timeline, but it's not. It's not what I call an exercise left to the reader for the weekend.
You sound like a professor. Okay, so with that, where do you see the more immediate successful usage? What industries and how do you see generative AI being used more successfully, and that the technology matches the business or societal need or demand?
So we have, in the work that we have done, first of all, I should say, we have identified 20 or so classes of tasks, of use cases, with each use case having several sub-use cases, if you can call it, where even with today's capabilities of open source and proprietary large language models, um, generative AI can have an impact. I should parenthetically say here that as a firm, we are not a big proponent of just using the large language model by itself. We typically think of the large language model as being a component of a larger intelligent agent-like system. I already mentioned the case of programming or automating the software engineering programming task. Customer support is another case that we see kind of like emerging across industries. And then we go into the more creative tasks, whether it is evaluating the certain types of documents or writing certain types of documents, creating initial design. So we worked with an automaker to see, for example, whether generative AI can be used to create initial ideas for new vehicle designs. Again, you're not ready to let the system create the entire vehicle to its finest detail, but through the prompting, we're able to see alternatives that in the past would have taken many hours to create. So we see industries and today with financial services, automating various types of manufacturing, telco. We've done some work there. So in all of this, we've been able to apply at least one of these 20 classes of use cases that I mentioned. More generally, and I've written a little bit about that in my blog, we're seeing, particularly this year, corporations experimenting with generative AI. We are not, I would say that corporations have not yet drank the Kool-Aid in the same way that venture investors have. So in the venture world, you're seeing very large sums of money going into startups that develop generative AI systems, or systems that are based or the core have generative AI. At the enterprise, both here in the US and Europe and a little bit in Asia where we do work, we're seeing experimentation with a goal that if experiments go well this year, by next year to have much more substantial budgets being allocated explicitly for generative AI and maybe more broadly AI systems, something that we are not seeing yet today. I mean, today we're seeing some allocation, but I'll call it experimentation allocation as opposed to production allocation.
What do you see, for example, generative AI doing in healthcare or in government services, municipal services? Do you see any of that in the near future?
So it depends what you mean by healthcare. We are seeing, or we are already seeing, analysis of genomic data by large language models. In general, large language models are well suited for tasks that have language-like structure. That's why they're very good at programming. That's why they can be good in biology, where you're looking at, as I said, genomic data. There's a customer support aspect of healthcare, where again, I think they can be helpful. Can they be used for diagnosis? I think that's too early yet. In fact, I was reading an article, I think it was during my travel, of doctors that are starting to use generative AI to provide diagnosis. and there have been problems with that approach. Earlier, if you think about it, IBM's Watson system, which was, you can call it a precursor to today's generative AI system. They're using slightly different technologies to get to the same goal. They tried to apply to cancer and oncology, and they've had certain failures there, which I'm sure are becoming lessons to avoid for the current crop of systems. But I don't doubt that in various aspects of healthcare, whether it is personalized medicine, whether it is, I said, drug discovery, whether it is patient interaction, we will see systems at whose core there will be a large language model.
Okay. So this has been fantastic. And I just wanted to know if you had any clothing thoughts about where we are and where we're going, and maybe even how to tell people not to panic.
Yes, please don't panic. Let's start with that. Look, the last 10 years, at least in the fields that I personally and our firm works, we've seen some tremendous developments. I mean, the autonomous vehicles started coming to the fore about 10, 12 years ago. Electric vehicles with Tesla came a little bit before that in their current incarnation. And during this period, even though we have not achieved everything that we were promised that we will achieve, we've seen some great advancements. And I don't want people to lose sight of that fact. Marketeers, regardless of what technology they're promoting, they will always get ahead of the game, right? They will always tell you that we will do a lot more than we actually do. But I think if we look back at what we have done and what we have achieved, we should be pretty happy, pretty satisfied, right? The same thing goes for AI. Maybe we will not achieve everything that is claimed that we will be able to achieve with generative AI, but these systems, in a very short time, they're exhibiting some impressive capabilities that make our lives easier. There's no question that they will have an impact on society, like every big transformation has. But I will say that, again, for the fields that we work in, and at the core of each one, and the common thread for us is AI. It has been an exciting and really exhilarating period.
Well, you're right at the core. You're right at the core in a specialty which is unbelievably critical to our society with mobility. So you have the front seat, and the rest of us will sit there with the popcorn and watch the show that you put on. So it'll be good to see.
Thank you.
So thank you for coming today. Thanks everyone for viewing. And if you have any questions, you can reach me at carl@blockandtackleshow.com. That's block, AND, no ampersand, tackleshow.com. And of course, if they're directed to Evangelos, I'll make sure I forward them to him. And he'll respond as and when he can. But thank you very much for coming, or Evangelos, and for all of our viewers, thanks for watching. Thanks for tuning in. If you want more info on the show, please visit blockandtackleshow.com. And you can also email me at carl@blockandtackleshow.com. Thanks for tuning in.